How's it going, everybody? Welcome, welcome, welcome in. I know it's been a long time, but we're here today. And as you know, the conversation that's happening, taking place is tokenomics refresh. I'm not going to take up too much more time, but I do welcome everybody who's watching us live through X, YouTube, Discord, Telegram, LinkedIn. We're all over the place for this one. And then if you're watching us after the fact, thank you. I appreciate it. Leave your comments, leave your questions, reshare, post it in your Slack, post it with the people that you love, post this everywhere. Let's make sure we get this all over the place. It's a really, really important conversation. We have the Agoric team and we have DCF joining us for the conversation. So it's gonna be a good one. So enough for me. Let's get right into the conversation. And when we switch over, we'll have the group conversing on tokenomics. So I'll see you in a bit.
Oh, here we are.
Hey.
That was short and sweet. Thank you, Miguel. And hello, everybody, and welcome. We're here today to talk about the refreshing Agoric tokenomics and build as the foundation. Bob Calabrita, the Vice President of Marketing for DCF, and I'm here with Rick Shreves, the President of DCF, and Mr. Dean Tribble, who probably needs no introduction, hopefully. I was sure that a lot of people want to speak about various things. This is actually a continuation of a September 26th discussion that DCF put on Discord about the tokenomics restructuring and the refresh. And we're here today to talk about some of the framework, as much as we have in place at the moment. And this is structured as an AMA. So throughout the conversation, we'll go ahead and we'll pull up some community questions, and Dean and Rick will address those. So welcome again, Rick and Dean, and let's get right into it. Basically, Dean, how did we get to where we are, and why now on the tokenomics refresh for Agoric and for Build?
Mm-hmm. So, I think the big way we got to where we are is Agoric, the company, in April really shifted to, and this is on advice and feedback from a lot of people. We need, orchestration is awesome. Orchestration was starting to get traction, but it looked like a very, a long tail in order to ramp up. Agoric, the company, needed to build an app that showed this stuff off. And Agoric, the company, needed to build an app that users cared about and solve some problem that we could uniquely solve where the moat of orchestration would be of value there. And so we shifted gears to that as sort of the key priority. But the other ingredient was we knew, and we had talked about this, that the underlying tokenomics wasn't aligned with orchestration, right? It was all about how much economy is local on the chain, and orchestration is all about, there's $1 trillion economy out there that we can control from smart contracts on Agoric. And so that none of that economy that we would be able to control, moving from ETH to Base to Arbitrum or whatever to Noble and DYDX and etc. None of that would end up landing on Agoric, and so it would not power a value that scaled with the amount that landed on Agoric. We wanted something that would align with controlling and making this seamless cross-chain activity happen. And so the two elements of that are, first, all of that is going to be driven by actual usage of orchestration, which is certainly my primary focus and the primary focus of Agoric building an app. But that has to align with the mechanisms underneath, co-evolving with that to make sure that it works for applications, it works for our application, and it works for applications that other people build, that people build inspired based on leveraging that, etc. So that's what we're focused on build tokenomics here.
I think it's important. We had a 2-token ecosystem previously, right? And because IST has been sunsetted, this helps us concentrate Build as the token of the ecosystem.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So it's very much Build as the power, not just for gas, and also for orchestration fees, and for the sort of the value add that orchestration brings to the table. Where the other element of the goal is, all of the power really needs to come from producing value for end users and having that turn into driving either consumption of Build or value to Build, or both, right? And so orchestration should be a net consumer of Build. And as it grows, it could exceed emissions, and then you get to where build is deflationary. That is an ideal for the future. That requires aligned tokenomics and then actual use of orchestration. And so those are our two big priorities.
Yeah, and I know you're gonna go on, Rick. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm stepping on everybody today. It's the nature of the beast, though, isn't it? I agree with all that, but I'm going to give a slightly different perspective on it. I mean, Dean comes in here as the CEO of Agoric Opco, and these things that are happening in the evolution of Agoric Opco right now are very, very important because they're the valued partner that's doing the development on the chain. But also, in addition to the shift in Agoric Opco's focus, as Bob highlighted, this IST was sunset. Between the shift in Opco's focus, between the sunsetting of IST, and the fact that we've seen that the existing model wasn't getting traction, the time was here. In fact, some would say it was very much overdue for a look at refreshing tokenomics. And I know there are a lot of voices in the community who've been critical along those lines too. And so we do hear those things and we do take them on board. And I would say that in addition to the priorities that Dean has highlighted from a DCF perspective, I look at it and I go, we need a sustainable model for the network, right? The network fundamentally has to have a sustainability model that we believe in. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to attract builders. We're not going to be able to make a play for it in the long term. And we're not going to be able to achieve the goals that everyone wants us to achieve. So I think it's time. It was perhaps overdue in some people's opinions, but it was certainly time. And that's what we've been doing. And I'm looking forward to talking about it with everybody today and helping people understand what's on the table.
That's great. Just as a reminder, before I said Discord, the conversations happen in Discourse, and we encourage anybody who hasn't been part of that conversation, who hasn't read it, there's a lot more detail in that conversation. So go in, and that's part of what we're trying to exercise here is community involvement. So we want to hear your voices, so get over there and let your voices be heard. Now, Dean, I believe that you have some slides prepared. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in the conversation. There's words being tossed out like purser and comptroller and, all these postage and all that. I think maybe your slides and some of the things that you're going to say next might give some insight to that. All very important part of this, the framework that is being proposed at the moment.
So just in terms of keeping expectations in line for the people that are watching this, we're going to do a quick little intro presentation to set the stage, and then we're going to jump into questions, right?
And thank you for all the people who did post questions in the Discord.
Exactly. We are going to get to those, and we're going to get to the questions that are being posted already in the comments. I see them coming in. We'll get there.
Okay, let's show some slides. And this should be familiar to some people, right? It's build as the sole medium. Gee, can I click and make the slides go forward, or do I wave? Ah, magic. Right. So single token, and as Rick noted, right, we want sustainability, we want adoption, and we want it, and this is under the control of governance. And where to me, and I think to a lot of people, a big part of the sustainability is generating revenue around build, right? It's real revenue, not just emissions, that sort of thing. Next. So there's I'll go to the next slide. There's sort of some fundamental difference in the Agoric chain that results in difference in fee structure, right? Partly philosophically, the world of businesses, not just, the now, trillion plus economy of Web3, but, the outer economy. Users don't walk into a store and pay for part of the cashier's time and a little bit of the lights in order to be able to take a box and go buy it. They go in, they take the box, and they pay the business's fees to get the value that they wanted. And it's up to the business to pay the costs in order to deliver that service. And that is, that is a much broader way that people do business that is different from how blockchains operate, where, you pay sort of incrementally for the cost of working with a business as you do a business. Additionally, a big part of the feature of orchestration and the Agoric chain is that it can do asynchronous work, right? That operations don't just start and end within a single block. They can be multi-block operations that span minutes, hours, days, months, right? We've had promises that resolve 56 days later, right? And so that means that a gas fee up front that I charge a user for a transaction isn't necessarily coherent, because the volatile price of the implied activity over on Arbitrum is just going to be different tomorrow when I actually do the work that you asked me to do. And so the contract, the business, needs to have a pricing model that makes sure that they can pay the cost to deliver that service to the user, and that they're making enough money from the user to have that work. But they're doing stuff over time that they can't go back and ask the user, hey, sign another transaction, right? That's got to be something where the business arrangement there's a lot of ways that a business might arrange to be compensated for the work they provide, that they then pay the costs underneath. And so that's sort of that's sort of, there's philosophical and mechanical reasons that drive the focus for users is great. You pay a fee to submit a message, the anti-spam fee, but we think of that as postage, right? That's just, it's the same price no matter how much work you are asking for. You're paying for the cost of communicating it to the chain, to the business that's willing to offer you service, where that message you send may include app payments, the charges that the app will charge to give you the service, but that's not part of the application. And so then, when you have things where doing a swap is free, we're going to take a commission. Great, I can, cost me, a stamp to send you a message to do a swap that's arbitrarily large, and the business takes a commission. So, so there's, pure simple delivery costs like message size, but that's it. The business, the contract, pays for its own execution fees. Now,
if I could, Dean, I think, in simplest terms, and naming it postage for now is the user pays for the stamp, but the delivery company is going to pay for the bigger part of that whole operation to send it, right? The usage.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you're not going to move away from fees at the moment, maybe we can get a few fee questions in, or do you want to keep your flow?
Let me just finish this one thing about contract fees, and then we can talk about that, right? So the contract fees are contracts as they operate have a purse out of which they're paying for execution fees on the native chain, and out of which orchestration will draw fees to pay, the bridge fees, the fees that CCTV might charge. And like when we send a message over to Arbitrum to take the money that just got delivered with CCTP, which is Circle's USDC protocol, to take that money and put it into Aave, there's a gas fee on Arbitrum that has to be paid in ARB, right? Underneath the covers, the orchestration plumbing will convert from the bill that it will charge the contract into whatever the underlying token is to make that happen, right? And so those fees are paid by the contract out of pre-funding that they have in a purse, and it's drawn down. And so that's sort of the fundamental thing is businesses pay their fees that way mechanically on chain, and it's automatically charged to them as the contract causes things to happen.
Can I just jump in and give a slightly different perspective on this, which is what people should see here if they're looking at this and wonder why this seems a bit more complicated. What they're seeing here is an attempt to make the superpower of the network, which is the ability to handle orchestration, something that can be charged in a sensible fashion that aligns with normal billing and invoicing processes and is understandable by users and by applications. And it's that attempt to align the new tokenomics with the superpower of the chain that's really, I think, one of the strengths of this approach, right? And people need to understand that that's what this structure does, is it allows us to leverage that superpower without creating a really arcane fee structure for users that makes it hard for them to interact with the chain. That's the essence of what this is about, from how do we serve the end users.
Yeah, and indeed, contracts are more active than the passive things you see in some sense on Ethereum. So it could wake up and go, okay, now I need to do some rebalancing in order to, or amortize transactions in order to run more efficiently. You don't want the 100th user that for which it decides to amortize to pay for the cost of all the remoting movement that now needs to happen because it was trying to optimize transactions on the network.
Or think that you've had a transaction go through only to get a message 48 hours later that, oh no, you need to pay more gas for this thing to happen. Yeah, we're trying to insulate people from that sort of uncertainty and to make this predictable from a fees perspective, and to make it something that you can rely upon, and to make it sustainable for the network so that we can continue to do that.
So I think there was a question around this. That, yeah, if you pull it out here, a couple questions on the fee stuff.
A couple of questions on the fee stuff. Well, here we go. It seems like there are no Agoric Systems OpCo fees being charged. All fees will be distributed to build stakers for them to decide what to do. Is that right?
Well, that question kind of gets ahead of things a little bit. Now it's talking about how we actually distribute the fees once they're received. I think we're still trying to get our head around how the fees are received.
Well, no, I mean, so I'll answer it at this point anyway, right?
Yeah.
The answer is yes. This is all about build tokenomics. This is not about Agoric company tokenomics. And so there may be processes that use services by Agoric or Osmosis or anyone else that end up charging their own fees. Like if, you know, the contract like Fast USDC wants to pay its fees in USDC, that's going to be converted to build to pay the underlying fees in build. That conversion might happen through Osmosis, and Osmosis charges a fee, and it's going to earn funds because orchestration is using Osmosis to do that swap, or using Curve, or using a local native exchange that someone runs on Agoric. And so there will be fees, you know, being paid to support services, but orchestration per se, or the tokenomics per se, doesn't have direct fees to Agoric, other than Agoric is aligned as yet another build holder, as is DCF, as are hopefully all of you out there listening. But it is not the case that the fees just go directly out to the stakers and then they decide what to do with it. That distribution process is that they will go to what's currently called the comptroller. It might be that gets split into multiple agents. This is sort of technical detail that don't really matter at this point, but they will go in and that will do the reward strategy, which might be dispersing to the stakers, but it also might be taking whatever it's got, acquiring build, and then burning it, right? And so our expectation is a big chunk of the fee of the revenue coming into the chain turns into a burn of build in order to dynamically reduce the supply. And we'll talk about more of that as we get farther in.
And let's not forget that the distribution side of things too is also going to be subject to governance, right? So there's going to be different ideas explored, there's going to be different opportunities explored, and the community is going to be involved in that.
That's right.
We have one question that kind of goes between the distribution and the fee structure and talks a little bit about what you just answered, Dean. I'm not sure what your next slide is if it goes to distribution, but we'll ask the question and we'll give you can answer it now or you can wait until you are in the appropriate part of the presentation. It says, we are waiting for more specific numbers on burning and interest for stakers. That's the question.
Yeah, so that's
yeah.
And I'll put first generally, there is how do the tokenomics work, and then what are the specific logistics and tuning of numbers and stuff like that. That really is a later phase as we get to actually finishing out modeling and then trying it out in practice, where we will want to tune the pricing of orchestration actions to be paid by orchestration contracts that are using the platform. Right now, realistically, as we've run models so far, fees for remote activity far exceed the fees for local activity on the Agoric chain. Right? If you want to make a
cheap to run on.
Yeah. The chain is cheap. It's fast finality. It's common BFT. Its gas price, its token price is unrealistically low at the moment, right? And when we are reaching out to pay an XLR transaction fee, which is 40 cents, or pay for an Ethereum make account, which might be $5, right? Well, that's a much bigger fee than half a cent to pay for a transaction to run in orchestration on the Agoric chain at the moment. The taking a percentage of those remote fees as revenue to the chain that feeds back into the reward burn distribution mechanism. That percentage of $5 to make account on Ethereum is just bigger than the transfer fees, is bigger than the execution fees, and that's a big deal. And so we need that model in order to figure out the pricing. Go ahead, Rick.
That exact problem, that unpredictability and the variability of fees and cross-chain transactions is really one of the huge problems with cross-chain DeFi, right? Everyone's having to confront that. What we are trying to do here is we're trying to give a solution for that, a solution that is user-friendly and predictable, as opposed to the wild variability that you see now when you try to execute this stuff on your own, right? And really things like WiMAX are going to make this process so much less painful than it is right now. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, and one of the lessons we got is, part of the reason we need to implement our own app on top of there is to dog food the process and make sure
100%, 100%.
Work. And so that's why there will be iteration on things like the pricing and the exact structure there.
One more before you go to Purser and the Flow. We have one more in here for fees. It's great that we're getting questions. Is there a rent for long-lived orchestration state and GC archiving policy?
Good question.
So actually, I think maybe go to the next slide. No, I talked about. Okay, I'll answer that before I go to this. So there is two things when deploying a contract. There is the gas that it's going to spend to pay for execution, and there is a contract stake. Okay, and the contract stake in some, is in terms of build, and the pricing of that, I expect that to be a non-trivial amount that gets locked up for the contract. The orchestration infrastructure gets the reward for that to be able to deploy to get more yield, for which it will, buy back, build, and burn it, or what have you. But that effectively, the yield of that is effectively paying rent. Now, we would be able to, and in this structure, it's straightforward to add a fee for rent on an ongoing basis based on the size of your of the contract's footprint. But the execution fees that it has to pay include and scale with the size of the request. So if it's writing something into the Merkle tree or into storage that every validator then needs to maintain and have be available, that incurs a cost at the execution fee level on Agoric that it has to pay. And so it's just, that's a cost that it burns. That's not an ongoing cost, which would be rent. That comes out of its stake. If that turns out to be an issue, adding that so that there's an ongoing fee that you pay for the footprint is straightforward and fits within the framework. But I think that's double dipping, and we should see if we can do without it, because the stake seems like it should be sufficient.
To say that another way, and I'll do this really quickly. If I want to deploy a contract on the network going forward, I'm going to be hit with two different fees immediately. One fee is that stake that Dean just referenced, which think of it as a performance bond, right? It's an amount that you put up that is locked up and that will be debited if bad things happen, right? Governance will probably control that. Those funds provide a float that can be reinvested and earn yield, which can come back to stakers, et cetera. The second cost that you're going to be hit with is basically prepaying, this is a contract now, prepaying those orchestration fees. So the system will hold those prepayments and use them to cover off-chain and on-chain gas fees. And then the contract will have to top up that amount as they exhaust those fees monies that they prepaid. So there is a prepay of gas fees, and there is a deposit or a stake.
We will pay gas from a gas tank. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. You have to fill up your gas.
So this is relevant. The difference there is relevant to this execution model, right? That because we're fundamentally async, so talking about the slide here, there are synchronous operations and there are the asynchronous operations. What we didn't want is the implementation complexity of having you've got an operation, it started, it now wants to write something to vStorage, and you ran out of money. Do we pause the transaction? Do we throw an error? Do we roll back? Turns out all of those complicate application implementation. And so what we do, this is where the contract state comes in. Instead, if you have the resources, great, they get charged and you execute forward, and they can get charged asynchronously, which is convenient in our system. But fundamentally, we write stuff we publish data that can now be visible off chain, so the application can see that, you've scheduled this activity. And that's what as an example, if the contract was trying to write something to persistent storage, an event log or what have you, it had to pay for that so that the app could, dynamically respond to what's going on. So in the case where you've got gas in the gas tank, where you've got gas in the purse that holds the gas, it'll get just charged against that asynchronously and everything's fine. If that runs out, rather than throwing errors and causing a bunch of error handling that people, always have trouble dealing with, instead, it'll just run a debt. Now, the application or the contract is expected to not get there, but if it does, things will operate normally. And this gives us some nice insulation as this is growing and as we are adjusting prices to discovering retroactively that some price was unrealistically low or high, right? But because, oh my God, we've got we've got some issue that's causing us to overcharge for, writing to vStorage. And so something exhausted its gas. Well, it'll keep running. And now we have time as a community to sort that out and make adjustments. Okay. So if it runs out of gas, then governance can step in to go, that contract is not paying its bills. We are going to go ahead and kick it off the network and slash it, right? No, it's just sitting there consuming time, not adding value to anyone. Let's vote it off the island, right? And that's where, the debt that it accrued gets paid off by its contract stake, and then the stake gets returned, right? Alternatively, anyone could step in and go, that's providing a common good. Let's go ahead and top it up from outside, even though it's not sort of earning its weight, even though it's not earning enough fees to cover its costs. We think it's a good thing. We will, from the community fund, from Agoric, from DCF, from someone who cares about it as a business, go ahead and top it up so it keeps paying its bills. Yes.
In other words, that gas tank that we referenced earlier that the contract has to top up when they deploy, anyone can contribute to that gas tank. I can put gas in the gas tank. Dean can put gas in the gas tank. DCF or whatever can. So it does allow somebody who's deployed a contract to deploy a contract and let it live autonomously without having constantly to tend it.
And that means that if someone abandons it, but people want to use it, anyone can keep it alive. Now, again, if you think of contracts as businesses, they ought to be making enough money based on the service they're providing to cover their costs, but people don't always get that right, and so anyone can make sure that it gets covered until the contract gets fixed or upgraded or what have you.
And just to tie this back, what you were saying originally, this mechanism means that the contract has the ability to charge whatever it wants on top of what it's paying for the gas. And that's where they make their profit. That's how to make sure there's revenues to keep the gas tank topped up. That's instead right. of it going to the user. The contract has to sort it out in their fees and their billing with the user, which gives them the design latitude that they need to create different types of economic models and be successful.
Yeah. My analogy, by the way, for that is if you look at the App Store for any mobile phone, all of them say free with in-app purchases, right? that in-app purchases is the business model. Okay. The second category is asynchronous operations. For asynchronous operations, those are generally off-chain or have a bigger impact. And so we can't run a credit. We can't bill you afterwards and just accrue a debt. That would be bad. We're not going to pay $5 to create an account and then come back and discover that you're out of money. So asynchronous, and the other thing is asynchronous operations, one of the wonders of asynchronous is you really can separate the concern of allowing progress because you don't have enough money from handling errors, right? If I send a message and want to have an account made over on Ethereum so I can then deposit into do a swap on Uniswap, in my contract because the two, that's what I'm aggregating, right? That fee, if I don't have enough to pay for that, it's not that it breaks and suddenly my contract has a bunch of error scenarios and so forth. I get an off-chain notification or my contract gets a notification saying you're out of money, top it up, or you can't proceed. And so that operation can wait until sufficient funds are available and then proceed.
And the other beauty of this design is one of the table stakes in terms of risk, if you're engaging in the cross-chain world, is transient weirdness on other chains. This mechanism helps protect the network and the contracts from transient weirdness.
There's also long-term weirdness, which this doesn't help with. But
that's a different animal.
Yeah, relayers down, bridges stalled, some spike in execution price, all that sort of stuff, right? Okay. So, that's sort of the main points around here. And from the point of view of the contract, it just needs to pay its fees. This is just the mechanics underneath of, the bond lets us do nice optimistic execution, if you will, on synchronous operations, and for asynchronous operations, we can easily bake in, again, minimizing how much effort it takes to implement a good semantics. We can easily bake in waiting on doing a remote operation until the contract pays its fees.
Maybe is this where we talk about purser and comptroller?
Sure, that might be in the next slide.
Okay.
Yes, it's in the next slide. Right. Okay. And I'm not sure that
Almost
these
like
work.
you've seen this before.
I actually haven't, but I think we should throw out the big caveat that these names are not yet set in stone, and I believe that we're taking suggestions from the community for the actual names.
Yeah, having it all be purser, or having purser be the ship-wide one and steward be the per contract one. So there'll be a nice bike shedding sub-thread in the channel. But the architecture is really the important thing. So the key thing for the per contract component is it is ensuring that the chain gets its portion, and simplifying the problem for the contracts. Fast USDC, it was sort of dipping its toe into cross-chain liquidity. It makes USDC. It gets its fee in USDC. It's about moving USDC quickly between chains, not just Cosmos chains, but ETH chains, and rather than complicate it, having it contribute funds to pay for its orchestration fees in USDC, and then it's up to the purser to sort it out on behalf of sort of working for the chain to solve the problem of the contract. It does the swap into BLD, buys BLD on the market, and then and make sure that it's there to pay the fees that orchestration will charge when FastUSC reaches out to do something on Noble, right, or wherever it is, right. And so and so that's one of the main functions of the purser, is make sure it converts to the right token and puts the token into the right underlying purse for paying off the gas fees or the execution fees of the contract that it is providing assistance to. That's its primary thing. Now, so then the comptroller's primary initial thing is to hold the stake, the contract stake that must be deployed, and support the governance actions if a contract misbehaves, so that the contract stake can get slashed, right, or get delivered to sacrificed to the reward gods and dispersed as however the chain will disperse. Now, the comptroller is also in the right place to do the reward processing and a few other things. So first off, given that it has the contract stake, it can then deploy it to make yield for the chain, and that might be just staking it, or it might be putting it into low risk yield services as a getting additional chain reward for having the asset that is backing these deployed contracts, and that will provide a reserve. That'll provide sort of that'll enable it to build up a pool of tokens required for gas on other chains in order to optimize the overall chain fees that have to be paid for orchestration and remote accounts. But that's something where that's second. The first thing is got to support the governance and the slashing, and then over time we can add smarter and smarter orchestration to take advantage of the capital there to leverage it for yield for the chain.
Yeah, the comptroller starts to get interesting when we hit scale, right? In small scale scenarios, the comptroller is really just sort of taking a managerial function. But in a situation where we do achieve scale and the amount of monies that are being held by the comptroller is substantial, then there are yield opportunities. And what, of course, happens with that yield is going to be something the community will get to decide.
Perfect. All right, let's go to a couple of questions on this topic then. We have one here that says, Purser has to buy build to pay for gas, but where is the liquidity? If build is illiquid, which it is, any large that was part of the question. Any large purchase will cause a huge slippage.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
first off, part of the reason the token is the token price is very low is also build is illiquid, right, or relatively illiquid. That means a small sale, it hits the price. So, architecturally, I mean, generally the way markets work, if there's actually known ongoing trading activity, you will get liquidity there. Will we power, will we and other people in the community help power that liquidity? Sure. Right.
Mhm.
How much and where, that'll all be, how much we can disclose, I'll have to figure that out as we go forward. But that's something that we have done before. We've provided incentives in various markets before, as has DCF.
And we employ market makers.
Yeah.
And we employ market makers, and some of our, so there will, once there is automated trading in this regard, where orchestration is driving build token acquisition and has a mechanism where it's then burning some, that will incentivize liquidity.
Yeah.
I am perfectly happy if there's a few rounds that is absorbing, relying is the wrong term. As a result of the illiquidity, and this stuff is buying back tokens, if that causes the price to go up, that's not going to hurt my feelings, right? That will stabilize in the market, right? This is, as it becomes clear that build is being used and consumed, then I think that provides a dynamic pressure for liquidity, and there's sources of it that are pretty natural. So,
yeah, the question identifies a hypothetical problem which exists in the current state of the market, but if the system is functioning properly, this is not a problem, and it is manageable even if it is tight. Again, through things like market makers, et cetera. So, this part of it doesn't scare me.
Yeah, and indeed, one of the things that the comptroller might end up doing that I expect it will do eventually, once it is accumulating and managing its set of tokens for covering various gas fees on various chains, is it will have its own ability to swap locally, right? And that either would be an outpost of a DEX that we rely on, or it's just using an aggregate Oracle kind of stream to figure out what the pricing should be. That relies on an Oracle. Initially, part of the goal is let's not do more implementation than we need in order to validate that all of this works for users, contracts, developers, etc. And so having it do remote swap on Osmosis, that technology already works in orchestration, and so that it's fine to start there. And once there is enough volume, then one can deploy other mechanisms transparently, and the rest of the architecture is stable. And we just get more capital efficiency as we get enough scale to motivate that implementation work.
That's a perfect segue into the next question. We have two more in this topic, and then we can probably move on. If build grows, which we want, also in the question, also my personal feeling, of course, the gas costs of all applications also grow proportionally. What kind of business can plan if it costs can grow 10x in a month?
Right.
So,
Right.
Yeah.
So that's only if the price in terms of build stays the same. That we just, doctor, that hurts. Don't do that. Right. So now, a characteristic of this scenario is there's a bunch of pricing set by governance.
Mm-hmm.
It would be nice, it would be great if it was straightforward to make it be market-driven pricing. But that's not possible in the current environment. And so it is governance that will set the pricing. There are two models for doing that, and it depends on the availability and cost efficiency of oracles. One model is it sets the pricing in terms of dollars. Here's how much a local make account or a local orchestration application does, and so you need to pay enough build to correspond to that price. And then as the price of build changes, the amount of build that you have to spend to do that changes. The other version is it's defined in terms of build. I sort of generally have that preference, but that does require, a regular cadence of repricing everything to scale it up or down based on the market price of build relative to USDC or dollars or what have you. And so as the price of build goes up, it does not cost the chain more to do a transaction. And so therefore the cost of doing a transaction should go down in terms of build, right? So it's reflects a reasonable fee to the chain for that operation. And eventually, once there's enough, figuring out how one gets a market price for the transaction is something that frankly I think requires a lot more experience of actually paying for those so one can produce a model. And so we are not making an attempt to do so. We will have modeling of application usage of these and come up with a pricing schedule that we propose as initial schedule, and then we will expect to revisit it, every month. Maybe depending on volatility, maybe more often than that.
And honestly, the essence of the question is what kind of business can plan if its costs grow 10 times in a month? The threat to that isn't the price of build, it's the cost of off-chain transactions and orchestration activities that actually creates that unpredictability threat to a business. And I totally appreciate that. Having predictable costs is really a foundational sort of financial management thing for a business. And this is, again, why the prepay and why this structure is designed to help insulate from this and give you time to make adjustments.
I don't want to overstate that simply because, if the price of ETH is much, much higher, you're not, that's the cost. It is what it is. If it costs $50 instead of $5 to do something, then we aren't going to influence those prices. However, this is where the dynamic, nature of orchestration is, where it's like, well, if it costs $50 right now, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go, do this round of stuff on Arbitrum, and I'll go to ETH when the price is lower, right? And also there are things where, like, the orchestration layer can go, okay, the price is down right now. I'll go ahead and make some accounts to have them in reserve, so that when someone actually wants an account there, I've already got it. Here you go, and we don't have to go do an operation on ETH at the time. That ability to do asynchronous activity is something that we want to grow over time. We'll start simple.
Generally, it's a scale-up challenge, and we look forward to attacking it when it comes. Dean, what do you have next on your slides?
Well, we should we've been going through questions. I think that you can go to the next slide, but I think we should race through whatever questions are left here.
All right. We can definitely do that. Let me try to pick some that perhaps touch on some topics that we haven't touched on yet. Here's one. Do you plan to cap the maximum issuance, say at 1 billion tokens, to increase value? And it's coupled with stop the inflation and fix max supply. I thought this was interesting because it has to do with emissions, and we're discussing that a bit.
Yeah, I think the important thing is, so I actually don't, a cap is not the right thing to me. I'd rather have, a cap just means, the rate of growth and the rate of reduction is the same. I'd rather have, something that ends up net deflationary. But to me, that's a destination. It's not, you can't just say, that the cap is 1 billion and you can't say that pi is 3. The structure needs to reward validators. And I know with the token value where it's at, the reward is not what we want to be delivering to stakers and validators as is right now. That, that's something that we as an ecosystem need to grow, and we're doing our part, right? But the model, we're not changing the model of there are emissions that reward stakers and validators. What we're working on is the consumption side, where actual use will drive up consumption of build in order to offset that. And so that when I said there's a reward process, all the fees, the commissions from remote operations and asynchronous operations and the fees go into the reward disbursement. Some of that will go to stakers, and some of that I expect goes, we would support goes to burning build tokens, right? So it's reducing the net supply with a goal eventually to burn more than gets emitted, right?
Correct.
And the knobs for how much gets burned versus emitted when we're above or below the current emissions rate, those are things that would be set by governance. And so we as a community would figure out exactly what that should be, right? There's good reason to have the reward primarily go early on to the stakers and validators to reward people for securing the system and reward the operators for executing the work. But over time, having that turn into having some of that be burned on an ongoing basis, so that we're also reducing the net growth, I think is a win.
One of the things that we see oftentimes come up in these conversations is this conflating of let's cap the supply and let's stop inflation. And there are two different things, actually, right? We can talk about capping the supply, but that means stopping issuance, right? And there are design and tax advantages for keeping issuance in the system. So let's just assume we want to retain that flexibility. The real question is, how do we stop inflation, right? That's what you're trying to achieve when you cap the supply, right? Or you stop issuance. And we can achieve that goal of being deflationary even with issuance through mechanisms like burns and other buybacks that take things back, that take things off the market and lock them up for very long periods of time. So keeping emissions in the system, keeping issuance in the system is desirable from a design point of view. It gives us more flexibility. It gives governance more flexibility going forward. We all have the goal of seeing this token be deflationary. We just disagree that capping the supply is the right way to do it. And it's a process to get there.
Certainly is. All right, we are short on time. We're going to let's do 2 more questions. I'm sure people want to hear the word WiMAX in one of the questions, and rightfully so. One before that, what are the timelines you were thinking of for changes to be implemented? And is there any developmental work needed from Agoric on these changes?
So we've certainly designed, kept in mind, we would like to do things, minimize the engineering work, and make it so that we can do it incrementally to get closer and closer to this, to the goal of what we're doing here. We need to dog food it and validate this stuff as we go. And so, WiMAX is a customer of orchestration. WiMAX will pay its bills, right? And, we're acquiring build already in order for WiMAX to have the build that it will use to pay fees. And it's prepared to, as those fees go out to Axelar and it spends build to go buy its gas tokens to get them back so that WiMAX can do it all over again, right? And so we'll start to see, as usage grows, external flows that are transacting build and a process of consumption. We don't need to build all the infrastructure in to enforce it, as long as we're playing ball in WiMAX, and same with anyone else who's rolling out, where even if we're figuring out the fees and exactly where, from an engineering point of view, is the most efficient place to enforce it, we can make sure that after the fact, looks like we owe this much to the comptroller. Here you go. Oh, and it's going to burn it. Great. It's burned. Right. And so we will be continuing to do modeling. We've got, a light paper in progress, that the feedback and the questions that people asked in the refreshing forum, and any more that get asked here or in that forum later, we'll go into. And then we'll start to do some mechanics in the orchestration layer and gradually put it in deeper and deeper into the system, like into the scheduler layer to charge for, incremental JavaScript instructions kinds of things. Right. And that will happen over time. So we'll have some amount of implementation starting in Q4 probably, but really this has to be informed by, what does a real orchestration app use, so we can charge for that and get a reasonable fee for the service that orchestration is providing. And so I expect to do a lot of measuring and planning and proposing prices and discussing them, and setting aside build to backfill that, and then start to do more of the actual enforcement implementation work, come Q1, Q2, and really get it done in, get it done with all of the mechanisms enforced and abstracted for other parties in, late 2026.
You unintentionally answered 2 of the last questions, which is fantastic. And again, the focus for Agoric at the moment is WiMAX. I want to be. The other thing, part of the reason why the focus is WiMAX is
there isn't a silver bullet, right? Orchestration will be valuable. All of these mechanisms will reduce build, not because we magically, did some kind of Ponzi thing here. It's because we get actual use of a service that's consuming orchestration that users want to pay for, and that produces the revenue that turns into revenue that buys, build, and burns it, right?
And
we want that to happen.
We're going for DeFi operators.
With
orchestration and this fee system, we're also solving a very thorny problem for DeFi applications.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This produces real value and is really powerful. The mechanic there is it solves that problem and it's worth them paying for it. And
Correct.
That pay goes to paying for orchestration services that drive this mechanic, right? So,
the idea of grounding the tokenomics and delivering actual value that can be used by devs and by end users is what this is all about.
That's right.
Great.
And so our focus on WiMAX is, we want an app that people use that happens to drive orchestration activity, and that will be a value to the chain that will drive that'll drive a bunch of build. So.
And we want other developers to see that and come build on the
Yes. Come build.
And that way, any pain that they have to go through to build, we already did everything we could to address it. And so hopefully, we give them a better environment because we dog fooded our own infra. I mean, we've done that before, but
it usually works.
Yep.
Well, guys, great conversation. We're a little bit over time, quite a bit, actually. I'd encourage everybody who's listening or watching, get over to that discourse conversation and have your say, have your inputs. Good news for you, WiMAX Maxis. They are Agoric's going to do a specific community event on WiMAX, so hasn't been ignored. This, of course, was focused on the token shift, and just wishing everybody to have a great day, and thank you for joining us, or night or morning or wherever your sun might be. See you guys. Miguel, you can play us out.